something about Skype being interfered with some kind of internet service or something. One thing I found about podcasts or about anything technology-wise, be ready to adjust anyway, just like in baseball, right? Inning to inning. You better
Absolutely.
expect the unexpected, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It happens to me all the time.
Well, we're still live on Facebook, folks. So if you got any question for Matt Lisle, type it at the bottom. We're going to rock and roll. We're going to get into a little of the hitting later, but I want to get into this also because this is for all the folks that made the mistake of saying that you throw like a girl. Well, you haven't seen softball players play, and you haven't seen women's baseball. You haven't seen women's professional softball because, man, they can flat out play, Matt. And here's the thing I want to ask you. Besides their skills, they definitely got the skills, and they got the willpower and the knowledge and everything it takes to try to be as good as they can. Besides the skills, what makes them pretty good?
I would just say that in my experience in softball has just been that the female athletes and male to the same, they're ambitious. They want to work hard. They want to win just as bad and so for me, from a skill set standpoint, I haven't seen any difference between the male student athletes and the female student athletes I have coached in the sense of their desire to get better, play on the field, give their all. So for me, I don't see any distinction between female and male athletes in regards to their desire to win and to work and everything else.
How's the game of softball changed throughout the years, 3 years you've been coaching in it?
So when I first got into it, like I said, I got into it in fall 2012. There were not a lot of males in the game, especially not a lot of like hitting guys like me. And what I remember from softball being younger was that, the games were 18 innings long and it was 1-0. Like there was no scoring. Offense is insane in softball now. I mean, you'll see double-digit scores, 15-14, all the time. Whereas when I first got into softball, that never happened. The offense has absolutely exploded across the board. That's one of the things that I have noticed is that hitting development across the board has gotten huge in softball. And for me, the biggest thing that I learned about softball when I first got into it was the growth mindset that the softball community has. I would tell you 2013, 14, and even 2020, if you look at baseball, we're still arguing about all this stuff in baseball. And it's just like old school versus new school and all the things that baseball has an issue with. But in softball, across the board, coaches are like, hey, how do I get the new information? How do I get the better stuff? How can I help my hitters and my players get better across the board? And so the softball community as a whole is such incredible growth mindset that it's allowed the sport to develop at an crazy pace versus I think baseball has. And so I think softball, which may have been behind a little bit in regards to technical teaching at the high level stuff, is no longer that way. I think that across the board, coaches are just getting better. You're seeing baseball and softball people collaborate. If you watch, Patrick Murphy at Alabama and at different schools, head coaches, Tim Walton, you're seeing this crossover and connection between college baseball and college softball coaches. And I think there used to be this divide between the two of them. And now you'll see softball people at baseball conventions. You see sharing information across the board. Twitter and social media has really allowed for this bridge to happen in collaboration. And I think that baseball stealing from softball people and softball people from baseball people. And it's really helped the sport grow.
Yeah, I remember, matter of fact, at the ABCA, a lot more softball coaches at the ABCA. And you and I first met at the Mohegan Sun, the World convention, baseball convention. That was an awesome place. I remember there, I went to listen to the softball coaches, and I was extremely impressed with the way they presented, how they had everything on the PowerPoints, the knowledge that they had. So that was very, very impressive. Let's do this. Let's take a question from somebody on Facebook. Ryan Pryor, he brings up a good point. At the very young levels, I know you've taught at all levels, 10, 11-year-olds. He mentioned, just like in baseball, but softball's even more. The ball's way too big. That hinders the development. Any advice when it comes to that? He mentions a smaller softball.
Yeah, it's funny. So softball it has a 12-inch ball in high school, college, and the pros, and in the younger age they have an 11-inch ball, which is a little bit smaller. Now you think about baseball, same thing, 9-inch ball. And I think about my own kids, like my son who's playing catch in the backyard, small hands. It's amazing to me that the game of baseball and softball doesn't have a tiered thing. Like you think about soccer and basketball. Soccer and basketball, they have a size 3 ball, size 5 ball. Basketball is 27-inch, and they grow. Baseball and softball hasn't done that. And so, and I get it from a standpoint of like having to hit a ball that's smaller and smaller. So, I would say I would love to see the game of baseball and softball find some ways to have some smaller balls. I would tell you that I think it's really an interesting thing to look into as the game progresses. I would love to see that. And I would just say the hard part about that is, especially if you have really young kids, I have no problem, having them a softball player. My daughter's going to be 7. No problem with her working with a baseball and playing catch with a baseball and getting used to learning how to play the game with a smaller ball. But I would love, if you are a little league person or have the ability to have some influence in that area, I would love to see the younger groups use smaller balls in both sports.
Matt, and I agree with you. And I'll tell you this, maybe, it's a transitional period. Maybe during practice you use a smaller baseball, like you said. It can be, and for everybody out there, we know why they haven't gone to a smaller baseball. It's the same reason why baseball's been behind for 10 years, because it's a traditional game, and people hate to break tradition. And finally, we're starting to break tradition, but it takes a little time. There's a lot of things we could talk about breaking tradition, because baseball's certainly done that. I'm sure softball has also. And Ryan mentions even in tennis, they go to a smaller ball. Of course, they have a bigger racket, and then you got to worry about baseball. It's a smaller ball. They're going to be able to hit the smaller ball. It's like you said. So it's not an easy answer, but I think to throw it in your training. Listen, you mentioned cross-training. I think this is very interesting. I do this in hockey and other sports with friends of mine. Talk about how the two sports can cross-train and what they can learn from each other.
For me, I just think that across the board from an information standpoint, I think that we try to compartmentalize, like, this is a baseball drill, this is a softball drill. And I think there are some things that are that way, but I think we can learn from each other, whether it's a drill standpoint or, for me, it's a good example of like Austin Wasserman does a great job with some high-level throwing stuff. And I think that, if you label that as a baseball thing, softball people, it's the same exact, we're throwing the same thing. The ball's a little bit different. But So to me, the drills that you're doing, throwing, fielding, these type of things, I think that you could learn from each other a lot in regards to cross training for that. And for me, I think that the biggest gain that I have seen in Division I sports when I coached at the University of Oregon and South Carolina, different places, is that the biggest separator for me from the athletes at the highest level isn't so much their skill set as it is their weight room, like what they do in the weight room and how strong they're getting. I've seen some incredible athletes really spend a lot of time, building strength and speed in the weight room, and I've seen that translate more on the field. And so, a lot of times people send me videos of their swing and stuff like that, and we have a couple players on our team this year at Fresno State, and like, hey, what can I do with my swing? And I'm like, get in the weight room, start lifting, like start getting stronger. Like those are the answers. And I know they sound like they're not very sexy. They're really simple. But honestly, like if I have a teenager or a college player who's never lifted before and they're asking me, how do I hit the ball harder? I'm saying, get in the weight room and start lifting. So, I think that, I think that's been a big change over the years too, is, when I was in high school, weights class was a goof around class that we hung out with our friends, and every once in a while you bench press and did some bicep curls. And now I think back to that and thinking, man, I could have been such a better athlete if I'd not goofed off in that class and actually focused on getting stronger and better.
A great point about when I mentioned cross training, that really the drills are a lot of them are the same. What you're learning is a lot of the drills, the different drills you talk about, but also, the games are a little bit different, right? Softball, you're starting to see more bunting. I mean, not starting to see, but you see more bunting in softball. Baseball, we're reducing that. The younger levels, we're even reducing it because coaches are saying, well, you're not going to use it when you're older, which I think is a big mistake, but that's a personal opinion. So talk about the game of softball, the offensive things that are used in softball that possibly could also be used in baseball and should be used in baseball.
Yeah, so and I would tell you, the bunting in softball has dropped off dramatically. Now that almost everybody can hit a home run with the size fences and the technology of the bats, a lot of bunting has gone away. And I'm one of the biggest. I hate sacrifice bunting more than anybody. I'm in that world. But I will tell you, if you watched me coach high school baseball, we won so many games, and I had a lot of success because we bunted all the time. And for me, I love bunting. I love drag bunting, push bunting. I think anytime that you can put pressure on the defense and make them make mistakes, same thing, the biggest mistake I think a lot of hitters do is by never showing bunt, softball or baseball, they can always play back. They can always but if you show drag bunt or push bunt every once in a while, and the infield's always playing in because they're worried you're going to bunt, that adds 50 points to your batting average just by having the infield, in all the time on you or not knowing what you're going to do. So to me, good hitters and good offensive players have the tools to push bunt, drag bunt. They're able to bunt if they need to, and just by having that tool. So I hate to see that tool go away from a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I've won a lot of games by defenses who don't practice it enough and being able to break down a defense by bunting. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the sacrifice bunting, like with the runner on first with no outs, but in college softball, we learned a few years ago, and I hate to throw her under the bus, but Kelly Barnhill, University of Florida, one of the best pitchers in the last 15 years of softball. And if you look at her stats, and I'll tell you what, just to give her some praise, when I was South Carolina, we went over to, and we were so prepared for Kelly Barnhill. Every one of our hitters had an individual hitting plan, and we were dialed in on Kelly Barnhill. I think we struck out 14 times, and she one hit us. I think she had a no-hitter going to the last inning, so totally owned us. But one thing about Kelly that we learned in the World Series one year was she struggled with fielding bunts right at her, throwing to first base. Some pitchers struggle with fielding bunts and throwing to first base. And some teams went after her for that and ended up costing them a lot of runs. So, it's a perfect example of knowing what the defense is like, knowing if you have a pitcher that can't field bunts very well. And so for me, if I know the pitcher can't field a bunt and throw very well, to take bunting out of your game is foolish. You want to go right after those players. If you see a third baseman that's slow-footed or has a bad arm, you feel like you can expose them. And for me, coaching baseball these years, one of my favorite plays in baseball is a 2-out, nobody on, drag bunt to third base. When they're not expecting it, they're playing back. They would never sit on it, and seeing a really good drag bunt down third base to get things going, a 2-out rally. And so, I'm all in the no bunting group, but I will say that it has a lot of value if you do it right. And I love to see offenses that put pressure on the defense and get that defense to collapse. And I think base running is a big part of that too. I love aggressive base running. I would say at Fresno State this year and throughout the years that I've been a part of offenses that we've scored a ton more runs just by being really aggressive on the bases.
Interesting. And, softball at higher level or baseball, it's about winning. And so I would assume that you want to keep this arsenal just in case that you might have to use this. So you might as well practice it as live as you can. I want to give a quick shout out. Jean Allard from Canada. He is the public address announcer with the World Baseball Softball Confederation. And he had mentioned to me that about women's baseball development. We have a specific show on women's development when it comes to baseball because they're also obviously playing baseball. But listen, we got to get into this because I know this is the $1 million question. Comes up all the time. Get into your expertise, especially the swing. Different, same. Get into it. Let everybody know.
And I would tell you that there is absolutely nothing different between the baseball and softball swing. And I'll tell you, try not to speak from like a credibility standpoint, but I've coached in the Pac-12 and the SEC with some really good hitters. And I would tell you, the major league players that I'm working with, the college players that I'm working with at Fresno State, they're doing the exact same thing. I would say that the biggest argument that someone could make about the swing being different is that in softball, the pitches come in at a flatter plane. There's no argument about that. In baseball, we've got like a 4 to 12 degree descent. In softball, it's a little bit lower, and so you could make the argument for that. The difference between baseball and softball is that in softball, to hit a home run in most places, you got to hit a ball 67 miles an hour in the air. If you hit a ball 67 at the right launch angle, 26 to 30 degrees, the ball's getting out of the ballpark. In baseball, in college, in high school baseball, you have a 300-foot fence and 400-foot center field fence. You got to get a hold of it to get the ball out of that ballpark. And so, in order to justify maybe having a lesser attack angle in softball to maybe be a little bit more flatter, just doesn't make sense to me. Now, if the fences moved back another 50, 75 feet in softball, and home runs just kind of fell off the map, I could see maybe doing a little bit flatter swing in softball. But until that happens, and I don't think it ever will, I would never change anything from the swing standpoint and at all. It's the exact same movement patterns, exact same everything.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about the launch angle a little bit, meaning that the field's a little bit possibly a little bit smaller. So you obviously there's more home runs, and you're going to get into the launch angle aspect, but you also, most of your hitters, I believe, are 65 miles an hour bat speed. Yep. Or higher, and some are 80 miles an hour. Yep. So why would you not be hitting the ball? And you also said, I want you to talk about both of these. You also said, I'm not sure why somebody would want to not hit for power or paraphrase.
I think there's a stigma. Not so much in just softball, but in general, like, hey, this guy can't hit for power. This person's not a power hitter. And we, from all the data over the years, we know the harder you hit the ball, the higher your batting average is. I don't care if it's on the ground. I tell our hitters all the time in softball with a short 60-foot bases, hey, if you want to hit the ball on the ground every time, you hit it 85 miles an hour on the ground, people are getting out of the way of that. So, I don't – ground balls is fine, but you got to hit the ball harder. And I think that everybody can hit the ball harder than they have hit it in the past. And I think that in baseball, in my experience in baseball and softball over the years, that, 10, 15 years ago, we sacrificed power for contact. And you're seeing it in Major League Baseball, obviously. And now a lot of people complain about all the strikeouts and home runs. And I get all that. I think it will start equaling out a little bit. But I think that everybody can hit for better power. People can be more efficient with their movements. And like I said, at the college softball level, I haven't coached anybody that can't hit a ball 67 miles an hour, like to get the ball out of the park. So for me, and we've got 10 players on our team at 80 miles an hour plus. 80 miles an hour, like I said, our softball field is 205 down the line. Wow. 80 miles an hour in the air is like 300 feet for a softball player. And so you're talking about monster bombs. And so for me, we're always working on building power, because even if you don't put the ball in the air, let's take launch angle off the table. You hit a ball 85 miles an hour on the ground at a shortstop or a third baseman playing 60 feet away. That's some scary stuff. So, let's hit the ball. Let's get everybody hitting the ball harder. That's kind of the goal for me.
It makes so much sense because, like you said, hit the ball hard. You can get a hit on the ground or on the air. I mean, why not? Now, of course, the question is going to be, that sounds good, but how do I do it? Where does the power come from? How do you train for that?
So, for us, our training regimen, if I wanted to build power from somebody, I said the weight room is the biggest place. You're going to make the biggest gains in the weight room, like just literally physically getting stronger and more mobile. And so, with every hitter in our program and every hitter that I coach with, I always start with a mobility and a strength screening. Like, let's see where they're at. Do they have any mobility issues? Ankle mobility, hip mobility. They've got shoulder injury. They've got something. So, we want to build the engine first. Let's figure out how to get them stronger, how to get them, they might need to get more mobile. They might need to get less mobile and more strong. And so we kind of start there. And then from there, I do a lot of variability training, meaning that we use heavy bats, we use long bats, we use short bats, light bats, barrel loaded, hand loaded. We're, always trying to create variations so they can get more barrel awareness. And then, the biggest thing that we can do at the youth level, high school level, college level, is teach them just to swing hard. Like, literally, intent can gain you 5 miles an hour of exit speed. It's funny to say that, but for most kids, they just don't swing hard. And so just allowing them the freedom to swing hard is one way. We use a lot of plyo balls in our hitting. We hit heavy things. But at the end of the day, getting hitters to be more efficient with their lower half and learning how to, swing from the middle, I use the cue, their belly button, because the belly button can't really go anywhere by itself. So I'm always talking about, firing your belly button or, firing from the middle of your body. And if you can start learning, and for me, most high school, college players that I've coached, baseball guys like to use their hands a lot more. Girls like to use their shoulders and heads a lot more. And so just getting them to refocus how they use their lower half and use their hips is one way to do that.
And you've got some great drills on your website, CoachLisle.com, correct? I said that right, CoachLisle.com?
Yeah, it's thehittingvault.com. And I just realized I've got a low battery, so I got to plug in real quick.
That's all right. Hey, there's a podcast. We can do whatever we want on a podcast. We're still live on Facebook with Matt Lisle. And remember, attention to detail. That was my fault, because I always tell our guests that make sure that you've got enough power. Sometimes they're on a cell phone, and you try your best, just like being a great coach, you try your best to, try to be as organized as possible. You're always going to miss something. Make that adjustment, come right back. And look at Matt, 2 seconds, we're ready and rock and roll. Hey, listen, on the power, I heard you talk about, because I think another issue that young coaches and even myself have had issues with, location of pitches. A lot of times a high pitch and all of a sudden pitch at the knees. Everybody thinks, you're just going to throw your hands down there. Well, it's not really that. It's something else. How do you work with players on lower pitches and upper, pitches higher and lower, different locations?
So try to think the best way to say it is that, how we side bend and how we hip hinge is how we get to different pitches. And so if I'm trying to get to a low pitch, I'm going to side bend more to get to that lower pitch. And we use the term rock the baby sometimes. And so we're trying to side bend more. What a lot of youth hitters do, and I'll tell you, a lot of college hitters and pro hitters, to get to the low pitch, they take their hands to the ball. They bend their knees. They find other ways to get to it because they don't side bend very well. And same thing with hip hinging. How much we hinge our hips allows us that space to get to the low pitches. So, I tell hitters all the time, at a high pitch at our shoulders are going to turn pretty flat. And so there isn't a lot of hip hinge or side bend on this high pitch. But in order to get to this low pitch, we're going to side bend a lot to get to that. And our hands are going to relatively stay between our belly button and our sternum for the most part. There's going to be times it gets away with us in inside and outside pitches, but if I see a hitter that takes their hands to the high pitch or takes their hands to the low pitch, I know that they're not hip hinging and side bending very well, and I've got to figure out, is it because they have some type of mobility issue? Like, hey, they've had some, they're not very flexible in their hips, or something they've never been taught. They've always been taught take their hands to the ball, or it's a teach thing. And so I would say at Fresno State and throughout the years, we spent a good part of our practice time on working on swing movement, on hip hinge and side bend, like learning how to get to low pitches without dropping our hands, and how to get to outside pitches by side bending or giving ourselves space to do that. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. At Fresno State University, what are the things that you work on that you find yourself working on the most with your hitters?
I would say those two things, like side bend and hip hinge. I just think that we come across a lot of hitters, not just at Fresno State, in the country, that, the players at arm bar, they reach their hands out in arm bar to try to get to outside pitches or low pitches. Arm bar is a thing that they do. And as soon as they learn how to side bend and hip hinge, they don't have to arm bar anymore to do that. And so that's just something that we do a lot of. The same thing, I've got some players, and I remember South Carolina, one of our best players, like, she would drop her hands to get to the low pitch and try to take her hands to the high pitch. And, we spend a lot of time. So I would say just learning how to use our bodies is the best, how to side bend, hip hinge, and how to turn fast from the middle. That's where we spend all of our time doing, other than, working on plate discipline and which pitches to swing at, and, working on hitting the changeup and the different pitches. So, but from a swing movement standpoint, that's what we spend, 90% of our time on is, how to move efficiently and how to do it fast. Interesting.
You're talking about the hands hinge, the hand hinge. Well, Domingo Ayala was teaching that, the jock. He was getting them. I love that. Listen, okay, has to be brought up. Vision's such a big part in anything you do. Talk about a little bit about the vision aspect, some of the training you might do with it, because it has to play a big part eventually, right?
We spend more time on plate discipline, I think, than anybody in the country. I think that If someone asks me what my hitting philosophy is, it's do damage and get on base. And if you look at our teams from the last couple of years, slugging percentage and on base percentage are the stats we always lead in. And this year we were top 10 in the country in walks. I know at times I think we were 2 or 3 in the country in walks at different times. And so for us, our hitters, especially at the high level, like we're not going to swing at pitches that we can't do damage on unless there's 2 strikes. And so, training how to do that. So we spend a lot of time at Fresno State. We use a program called UHIT. It's a visual training program. We do a lot of that. Hitters can train on their phone, their iPad. I've used GameSense in the past. GameSense is another one that I really like. I know that Win Reality is a new one that is out there. A lot of guys are loving, anything that you can do to get your players to do it. And for us, what I liked about UHIT was they could do it on their iPhones. They could do it on their iPads at home at nighttime. So I'd tell them, hey, take 5-minute break from your Netflix watching, do your UHIT visual training. And then we do it in practice. So we use a thing called the V-Flex. The V-Flex is awesome, teaching you, pitches in the strike zone. We do a lot of, and for us, for example, the thing that Fresno State that we did really well was we didn't swing at rise balls. Okay. And a lot of colleges really struggle with that. And if you watched our games, we did a really good job. But you know why? Because we set the machine up every day and throwing rise balls, and hitters had to take the rise ball and swing at the fastball. And so our hitters saw rise balls so much that they learned how to lay off of it, and same with other pitches. So we trained that every day, and so I think that from the vision training aspect, we had elements of it in practice every single day, and we just made it a really important thing. We celebrated it. Hey, we want to lead the country in walks, and we want to lead the country in on base percentage. And so we talked about it all the time. And for us, one of the biggest goals that we had as a team was, if you get to an 0-2 count and end up drawing a walk out of that, like we celebrated that just as much as you hit a home run, because and for us that was a big emphasis. And so I would say at least a third of our hitting practices every day had vision training aspects to it.
Well, I got to tell you, I remember being in Belgium, like I said, and I'm facing these Dutch guys, at 46 feet, I think it was. By the time they get, stride, they're at 30 some feet, and this ball's coming on fast. I mean, what about the ability to pick the ball up as quick as you can, and the ability to time that same pitch? I remember what I did, because I had no clue. I just went back to my old thinking of coaching. I would take a larger stride and just lift my foot and put it down, because I was hoping to get to the ball as fast as I can. It came way too quick. Yep. How do you begin to teach that? I know it might be different for every hitter, but how do you begin to teach that?
Yeah, so it is different for every hitter. For us, the one thing I like about softball, again, is these 200-foot fences sometimes, and we have some strong hitters. So, taking away some of the movement, like a big leg kick or a big stride, can sometimes really help a hitter, like just to be able to simplify it, do damage without having to do all that. And so some hitters need to have more of that bigger movement because they're more athletic to do that. And so for me, it is an individual basis, but at the end of the day, again, like we've got to make contact. We've got to be on time. You could have the best swing in the world. If you've got bad timing, it doesn't matter. And vice versa. We see so many hitters that have what we call terrible swing or terrible swing mechanics, and they're great hitters. And we're like, how is that possible? And it's because they're on time and they swing to do damage. So, for me, if we're not on time to do damage, the whole swing mechanics don't really matter. So finding out, we spend a lot of time on timing. If I see a hitter struggling a lot of times, I'm going to go to the timing before I'm going to go to the swing, because to me, it's usually because they're late or early, or they're having some type of rhythm or timing issue. And, one of the things I like to ask our hitters all the time is, what do you use as a timing mechanism? When do you start your swing? And half the hitters have no idea. They're like, well, the pitcher starts, then I start. I'm like, well, what if she has a really long arm swing or really slow, or she stops? Like, what do you, how are you doing that? It's like, oh, well, I start the same with every pitcher. I'm like, well, this pitcher throws 70, this pitcher throws 58. How are we having the same swing? And so, a lot of times I'm always trying to get our hitters to communicate what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they're doing. And I need them to be able to tell me, you know what, when her swing comes back and she's at her full arm, or a baseball guy tells me when he gets to this position, that's when I start, or when he lifts his leg, I lift my leg. They've got to be able to communicate that so that we can say, okay, hey, you say that you're starting at this point and the pitcher's doing this, but this pitcher's throwing your timing off. Maybe we should start later, start sooner. And I think it has to be a continuous conversation about that. And hitters have to be conscious of what adjustments they're making from a timing aspect.
Matt, I think most people understand that the game's mental, and no doubt a lot of games are, baseball specifically, because you're going to fail quite a bit. Even in college baseball, I'm sure it gets in hitters' heads. Maybe, and even after they hit 2-line drives, it doesn't matter to some hitters because they think 2-line drive outs, are outs. How do you deal with that at the collegiate level because of the fact that it's in season? You don't have a whole lot of time. Yep. You've got to win. There's pressure on the coaches. How do you deal with all that?
Well, I always start by explaining to them, the best players in the game, baseball and softball, the best players at the highest levels, they're succeeding 40% of the time. So let's put that as the top end of success rate is 40%. And I think for a lot of kids, their success, if you were to ask them, what's the success rate for that you as a goal for you at this game, some of them are saying 50, 60%. I'm like, so you're Mike Trout. Mike Trout's percentage isn't even that high. So let's be clear about the expectations of success and understanding that 60 to 70% of the time you're going to fail in the sport. So let's start there. And then secondly, I ask them all the time, what is the number of at bats that you have had in a row that you would consider a slump? Let's talk about that, because I think a lot of hitters will say, 0 for 4, I'm in a slump, and I'm like, 0 for 4, that's just one bad 3-hour time segment of your life. And and so I think I always am trying to figure out from them, where's their mindset. And I think that I always try to tell them, Mike Trout is a great example. He's won a couple MVPs, obviously, and in 2 of his MVP seasons he had 0 for 19 streaks. Okay, so you're telling me the best player, and at the end of the day he may end up being the best player in the history of baseball, best hitter of all time, let's say, at some point maybe. He went 0 for 19 and won an MVP and batted .330. So, let's frame it around that. So, trying to make some perspective around it, and just understanding that you're going to fail. This game's tough, and you can still go 0 for 19 over a 2-week span, and you can still hit 300. You can still be an All-American. You can still reach your goals. And so for me, I start with that perspective, making sure they understand the perspective of failure, and then from there, just giving them tools to work to deal with it, understanding that everyone's going to strike out. So what is your flush mechanism? What is the way that you recover from failure? Let's talk about it, because you got to have it. So when I ask you, when you strike out and you come back in the dugout and I'll give you 30 seconds to get your composure. What are you doing in that 30 seconds? If you need to go to the end of the dugout and yell into your helmet, sure, go do that. I'm fine with that. But after that 30 seconds is up, I need you to be a good teammate. I need you to get locked in for defense. I need you to be going. So if you can't recover in that 30 seconds, we got to talk about it. So for me, giving them that time and making sure that they can understand what their flush mechanism is. For me, that's a big thing. And I want them to understand, you can go 0 for 3 in a game, strike out 3 times, and then come up in the bottom of the 9th inning or the bottom of the 7th inning and win the game for your team with one swing. That's the beauty of this game that we all love, is you can be the GOAT and everyone's mad at you for striking out 3 times. You're wearing the sombrero. And the whole crowd's like, oh man, this guy's come to bat and he hasn't hit the broadside of a barn. And you hit a walk-off base hit or a home run to win the game for your team. It's so you got to be able to always continue to give them a perspective of understanding that you're one swing away, you're one pitch away, and that if we dwell on the past, one of the best quotes in the history of baseball for me, I'm pretty sure Babe Ruth said it, is, yesterday's home runs don't win today's games. And to me, that's a great metaphor for flushing the good and the bad. We can go on the other end of the spectrum. You've gone 3 for 3. You've hit 3 doubles. You're feeling great about yourself, and you're really holding on to the past instead of focusing on what this next at bat's going to be like. And I think it can go on both sides.
I love that quote on your right shoulder. Never let the fear of striking out get in your way. A little shout out to Ryan Harrison. Slow the game down. My go-to guy for vision.
Yes, Ryan's great.
One of the best in the business. He actually has a show once a week now. Check it out on slowthegamedown.com. And we're going to have Ryan, actually is probably Yeah, he's one show ahead of you. I'm being the guy with most on baseball outside the box. But both you guys have been great to me, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll just say Ryan and Slow the Game Down. His dad, obviously, were great. It was a great guy, and the stuff that they do with the vision training is incredible too. When we were talking about the vision stuff, would definitely put him in the top there in the sense of what he has to offer, and I know he's helped a lot of hitters and teams.
Absolutely. Hey, tell me, batting practice in softball, any different than baseball? Anything unique? Anything you do differently?
The only thing that we can do differently, I think that most teams do, is we do a lot of we call it double barrel, where we can split the field in half and we hit two hitters at once. And so we're able to face two live pitchers at one time, just the way the field is designed. And so I would say that a lot of times we have two live pitchers throwing BP at the same time with hitters on the field. So that's probably the biggest difference that I see that most teams don't really do in baseball. You don't see very often is double or triple barrel BP on the field. But besides that, the way that I run stations is pretty much the same way.
Is there you have live pitchers, you have coaches in BP? Does it depend on?
It really depends. Like, I'll give you a great example. At the University of South Carolina, our graduate assistants were both like all conference, all American SEC pitchers and if you were to ask them, they probably hated me because I made them throw almost every day. And I would make them throw real like live pitching against our hitters every day. And I would tell them, hey, today I want you to throw, rise ball, curve ball, or change up. And so they threw every day at Fresno State. We're really, really lucky that our GA pitched at Oregon State. Our pitching coach, was a Team USA and also pitched at Fullerton. She's a stud. So they were able to throw every day live for us. So not every school has the ability to do that. And so for us, we were able to see, almost game-like live pitching every day. And the one thing that softball has the advantage of over baseball is that, you could have someone throw live for an hour and they're not dying, whereas in baseball, you can't have someone throw live pitching for an hour straight to your hitters, where the softball motion's a little more forgiving on your body.
You know what? Since you brought the pitching real quick, a quick question comes up a lot is, as they say, softball pitchers can pitch all the time, but there's still got to be wear and tear on the body.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else that you're still going to get like the wear and tear. Like if you ask me, hey, we're going to take 500 swings a day, it's going to be a lot more damaging to my body than taking 50 swings a day. And so, it's less damaging, but there's definitely the wear and tear of, throwing, I watched, it was UCLA versus Ole Miss maybe 2-3 years ago, super regional softball game, went 13 innings, 14 innings, and both pitchers went CGs, and both pitchers threw over 200 pitches, and it was like, you just don't ever see that in baseball. It's an interesting difference in baseball and softball. I've seen pitchers throw 200 plus pitches, and they're still going strong.
Wow. Matt, you've been fantastic. We're coming to the end. I got to stop it sooner or later because you got things to do, and we can go on for hours because this is awesome. Listen, during game day, we'll finish it with this, and then anything else you want to say to our coaches, players, or parents around the world. Some last-minute advice is always good to have. But during game day, what's Matt Lisle doing as a hitting coach?
So for me, I spend most of my morning and day watching the opposing pitchers of the other team, like watching more video. I've done it all week, but one thing that I pride myself on that creates way more work for me than anybody else is that every hitter on our team gets an individual hitting plan. So like I would create a hitting plan for Peter, and I say, Peter, here's the pitchers we're going to face. Here is your plan versus having a team plan and knowing your swing, knowing what your skills are. I'm going to say, hey, Peter, this is your game plan. And then I'm going to spend that day just kind of going over my notes some more, watching the pitchers, and then when we get to batting practice and players show up, starting to talk a little bit, just mostly about the mental side. We never talk swing mechanics. We never talk about the swing, just mentally getting ready. BP for me is about fun. Let's get loose. Let's have some fun music. Let's really focus on just enjoying our time, enjoying this game. And then as we get closer to game time, just fine-tuning our game plan, making any adjustments that we might see based on the pitcher. But for me, it's really about just making sure everybody is as prepared as possible, because once the game starts, the game is the kids. The game is for the players and the coaches. My goal is to not overcoach and let them play the game, but I want to prepare them the best I can going into that game. So for me, that day is about preparation, and then when we get to BEP, it's about having fun and relax and going in with the mindset of let's have some fun and let's do some damage.
All right, that was awesome. All right, give it up. And last minute, what do you got? Last minute advice to everybody in the world on baseball outside the box.
You know, my best advice is always going to come from a parent standpoint. I've got 5 kids. For me, my best advice, if you are a parent of a kid that wants to play, you want them to play on and on and on, you've got to give them permission to fail. That's the number one thing. You've got to understand that kids have to understand that your love for them has nothing to do with their ability. If they went 4 for 4, if they went 0 for 4, I think that I come across a lot of kids who they fail and they see that their parents treat them differently when they fail, and at some point they get burnt out from all of it. And as a parent, my best advice to parents is to enjoy this time that your kids are playing this game. Love on them, because my oldest daughter is 23. She's out of the house, she's working, and you're gonna miss that time. So give your kids permission to fail and enjoy the time that you have with them, that quality time that you get. Coronavirus in the world right now is a really tough place, but I'm really enjoying my backyard time playing wiffle ball with my sons, and I'm trying to spend as much quality time with my kids as I can with this game. And so my best advice is to really cherish and love on that time, because it's going to go like that. And if you make sports a miserable experience for them, you're going to really regret that down the road.
Fantastic advice from assistant softball coach at Fresno State University, Matt Lisle. We're going to have all this stuff on the show notes. We'll have everything. He's got 700,000 followers. There's a lot of people on social media asking for Matt and asking for his advice, because he has some great stuff. Matt, can't thank you enough, man. You went way overboard on time. Love it. Thank you. I've took a ton of notes. Wishing you a good day, and God bless you, man.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it, man. Take care, bud.
All right, one of the best in the business, Matt Lisle there, Pete Caliendo here. Thank you to our producer, Brian Crock with the Lineup Media Group. I want to thank all our listeners in the U.S. and around the world for joining us. You guys are fantastic. You keep spreading the word of the show all over the place. Please do so. We're getting better ratings all the time. Listen, tomorrow, the Boston Red Sox pitching coach, Dave Bush, 11 o'clock Central Time. Same show, same station. Everybody, thanks for listening to the show that loves to bring coaches with different concepts, different ideas, that love to challenge the status quo at times. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo, with Baseball Outside the Box. God bless you all, and we'll see you tomorrow on the next show.